You're listening to the Behind the Pipeline podcast, the show that helps your team sell more, faster. It's brought to you by Rik Williams, a leader in B2B sales enablement and go-to network selling. This show features revenue leaders sharing their stories, strategies, and solutions that helps you build repeatable revenue growth. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe now to the Behind the Pipeline podcast. Let's go.
From navigating the depths of the ocean in the Royal Navy Submarine Service to navigating the complexities of partner-led sales, Danny Keating has built a career defined by adaptability, resilience, and leadership. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Thank you. Hey, Rik.
Good to see you again. So, Danny, you're part of that really exclusive club. Not many people have been in it, which has been, you're an ex-Submariner. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I joined up in 2001, spent 7.5 years under the sea in 2 different jobs. I started in the warfare department and then, I guess, halfway through changed to the catering and logistics side and built a career running my own galleys in the end, but the submarine service based in Plymouth and Faslane in Scotland.
Awesome. Brilliant. So I'm a big supporter, and as you well know, about supporting service leavers and veterans, particularly into the IT industry, because I think there's a lot of, I don't think people are well educated on what the opportunities are, and typically the typical job you go into is project management or security for a lot of people. And I think there's a really great story that you've got in terms of how you moved from being an ex-service leaver and then moved into IT and into sales, and you've had a fantastic career. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. So how did you go from what was the story from being a submariner when you left, and then how did you actually get into sales? What was the steps you went through to do that?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth starting off what took me to the submarine service, because it lays out the way that I approached it. At school, I was a troubled child, really struggled to settle and find my thing. Grades were okay in the early stages of secondary school, but as the years went on, I really struggled. And I spent 3 or 4 years bouncing around gardening jobs and removals and any kind of manual labor that you could possibly get your hands on. And I sat down and had a chat with my dad when I was about 20, who, funny enough, went through exactly the same thing 30 years before and joined the paratroopers at 20. And he just said, look, you need to do something here and get out of the norm of what my life was becoming, which was just going up the pub on a Friday and then working and just existing. So my dad started talking to me about the military. And I remember one day I didn't tell anybody. I went up to the career centre and there was this submariner right at the back of the room, and I got talking to him and he just said, look, this is what we do. And it just appealed to me straight away. And I remember going back that evening and saying, I've signed up to the submarine service. I didn't even question it. I just did it that day. So that it took me down to Plymouth, and it gave me the opportunity to really look at my life differently. And as I mentioned earlier on, I spent 7 years in there. I resat some GCSEs, I went through some grades, and when I left, I decided it was either one of two things: go back to university or go travelling. And something was telling me to go back to uni. So I went back to Birmingham University as a mature student at 26, and spent 3 years doing a marketing degree around food at the time, because I'd just done the catering in the Navy. So I did a food marketing degree. And when I came out of uni, I thought, I want a job that is going to pay quickly. I was 30 years of age nearly. I'd spent 3.5 years in uni, which depleted a lot of the savings that I had when I came out of the Navy. I hadn't worked for 3 years and I wanted to get up to speed quickly, and decided to veer off away from the food industry because of financially, it was looking to me as if it was going to take a long time to get to a point where I could start earning the figures. And there I applied for a graduates program called Pareto Law, and went through Pareto graduate program, and there was this role that came up. I got through the assessment day and I got offered my first interview was a company called EDBA, and they were in a small office in Braintree. They were a small Oracle partner. They were looking for 2 sales development reps. At the time, BDMs we have changed various different iterations depending which company you talk to. But essentially, I was cold calling, and it was a big risk for me. I remember talking to my friends and family, and they thought I'd lost my mind going from the military into uni and then coming out and just going back to I think at the time, 17.5K job at 30 years of age nearly. So it was a big step. I was obviously really intrigued by the company and the individuals that were in the organization. Probably to this day, probably the greatest new business sales rep that I've ever worked for, or new business development manager, a guy called Matt Somerville, who was just phenomenal, aggressive, like he'd come out of something, the Boiler Room or a 1980s sales movie. It was very old-fashioned in the way that we were doing things, cold calling, hunting, power hours, all of that sort of aggressive sales environments that watched from afar but had never been involved in. But it was an absolute education for me, being in the cold face of how to truly go out and build pipeline and develop it. I loved it. And it was just something that I accelerated. And I think I look back and I've done a few things around the sort of military podcasts and things in the last couple of years. And I think actually now one of the things that military people don't really respect is the transferable skills that they build when you're going through that sort of millions of pounds worth of training that they put you through. And some of that around self-starting and being able to manage your own time, manage your own day, be accountable to yourself. All of these things actually were building blocks for me to accelerate in that sales development role. And I think it took me about 9 months, and I was running my own accounts within the 9-month period. So it was a phenomenal hunting ground, but also a great learning area for me was in those early days at EDBA.
Yeah, I think it's a great story because you touched upon this, and I think this is really important. There's 2 problems as I see it. One is service leavers don't always appreciate what skills they have. Resilience, grit, they have in bags of that stuff. Whatever service you've been in, you've suffered in some regard, whether it's crap accommodation or being beasted by a phys instructor or whatever. So everybody I've known in whatever branch, whatever regiment, whatever service is always highly resilient. Sales especially is a tough game. And you went in to, what a lot of people do, early junior salespeople go into some sort of SDR, BDR, business development type role, where essentially, typically that is university leavers or people like yourself who've just made a change of career. And it's really hard. There's a lot of rejection and you have to be methodical, persistent. It's pretty boring. You're doing the same thing day in, day out. And keeping that level of motivation and belief, service leavers and ex-military personnel are great at doing that. Yeah, obviously not spending time being in a submarine. Things like being on stag, just sitting there on guard duty, boring as hell, right? But you've got to be alert. You can't switch off. You definitely can't fall asleep. So there's lots of these things which I think I see in service leavers have the potential to make great salespeople. And I just think there's a great career there. So you took the gamble. You took a pretty low salary, bear in mind your sort of maturity at that point.
Yep.
But it's a commission-based role. The thing that not everybody understands is that if you go into a sales role, whether it's an SDR or whatever, if you put the work in and you're successful, they will happily pay the commission. And it's quite possible to start making some big money. So how long did it take for you to feel like, okay, not just found my mojo, but I'm getting the sort of, I'm making the type of money that I wanted to make, and you realize it wasn't a mistake?
Yeah, I think it was obviously the base salary wasn't great, so it was a struggle to live. I remember being with my partner at the time, and the two of us, he was questioning it at times because I could have gone and took a 30K job in a food development role for marketing, but I couldn't see where I could cap out at. I'd probably cap out at 30K. So it was what attracted me to the sales well was this ability, as you mentioned, to earn commission. And I remember the unique opportunity I had back in the day was that if I found an opportunity, my sales leader, Matt, would also take me through the process of closure. So not only was I being paid for developing the opportunity, but they would always also recognize the back end that it was me that found that opportunity, which I think is important, that recognition all the way through to close. And I'm keen now, and I've run sales development teams myself now, and I'm always keen to make sure there's gated areas to tap out a little bit of recognition and funding. But for me, it took about 9 to 12 months. I think in about the 18-month period, I was starting to get to a point where my wages were being doubled. And what astounded me as well is how quickly over that two to 3 year period, how quickly my wages were going up in line with my capability. So as I was developing as an individual, the business was recognizing me. And I found that I'd come from the Navy where it was so hard to get a pay rise. It was, I think, Margaret Thatcher was the last person to give the military a pay rise outside of like the annual increases. So you get your 2-3% a year, but apart from that, it's very static. And the promotional side of things is very structured as well. You've got to pass X, Y, and Z. It's not on the fly. So I found the sales environment just phenomenal in terms of how quickly you can progress.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a complaint I hear quite often from service leavers is that frustration with they could be highly qualified. They might have even done all the courses, but there's no place there. There's a lack of opportunity because they can't even be promoted because there's not a vacancy to be promoted into. I know it causes a lot of frustration. And this is why I think sales is a great career path for a lot of service personnel, because if you put the graft in and you put the effort in and have a continuous learning mentality, you can absolutely do really well. And there is no limit. There's no cap on earnings generally. And you went from an SDR, then I guess you went into more of a direct sales role at that point.
Yeah, look, it's something I work on. We've actually started an initiative with myself and a few Submariners off the back of working with an organisation called the Bootnecks into Business, who are phenomenal. They've been going about 7 or 8 years. Royal Marines, they meet up in London once a quarter, and they've basically created a mini networking group of individuals that I think in the last meetup they had, they probably, I think £2 to $3 million pounds worth of business got done in the room between Royal Marines that have all gone into various different fields. It's a great way of understanding and sharing that network. We've just done the same with Submariners. It's called Subs. There's about 4 or 5 of us that are engaged in developing that, but it's to take those levers and to give them the view and the insight into there's such a broader range of opportunity out there, and we're working with some really good recruitment consultants like Ben Reed and doing some phenomenal work around tapping into the capabilities and skill sets of the levers that want to get into the sales world. But yeah, for me, I went from business development into account management. We went through a few iterations at Red Stack or EDBA, then Red Stack, then Data Intensity. And I stayed there for about 6 years in a few different roles, but got to enterprise account director by the end, leading global sales initiatives and ultimately closing out sort of $1 million plus deals.
It's amazing, really good. Just to finish off on your sort of military career and progression to sales, what lesson would you share or lessons would you share with potential new service leavers who are either thinking about leaving or have left? Not necessarily to come into sales, but just in general terms, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I definitely had to calm down my directness because the civilian world isn't quite as open to receiving blunt, hard truths. And I think in the military, you respect the echelons of rank and so forth. So I always had respect for my leaders, but wasn't afraid to call things out as I saw them. And I think particularly I had a bit too of a direct style on my email capability. Thankfully now you've got ChatGPT to help you out in that way, but certainly in my early days I was often called a bit too direct, and I also had to calm my ambition down. But so there's definitely those areas where there is an adaptation from military life to civilian. You do have to be a bit softer. There is a transition that you need to respect. But yeah, I think that was my biggest learning curve in terms of just ensuring that I respected that there was a big difference between the military world and the civilian side of things in the way into which people operate and organizations. Things in the military, there's always management meetings, there's always heavy involvement. You're always table-topping things and getting to the root cause of a problem. Whereas I find in certain businesses, things can be quite laboured and take too long to action.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think, yeah, it sounds, what you're saying is maybe soften some of your communication, but definitely don't dampen your drive and enthusiasm and everything else. That's cool. Brilliant. Okay. So in EDBA, Red Stack, and Data Intensity, you were direct selling, but you're also, I believe you were part of the partner channel. So you're working predominantly with Oracle as the main partner. Have you spent your whole career on working for working for partners, or did you ever do a stint in just direct selling, not through the channel?
Yeah, I mean, that 4.5 years 5 years I was at Red Stack and so forth, and coming through in sales roles, direct sales roles. I was always responsible for a quota there. So you could say I was a direct seller. But what I quickly realized, and there was a few of us that were there at the same time, what we quickly realized is there was more power in the ecosystem and leveraging somebody like Oracle and building relationships with Oracle sellers than there was trying to go alone. And I quickly realized that actually building relationships with end customers is vital, and it's the nirvana for every organization. But actually spending my time, and I think I was fortunate enough to be in a world where the cold calling was changing. It wasn't the way that organizations were doing it 5-10 years before me. So I started seeing the tail off of cold calling, the fast tracking of LinkedIn, and the ability to be able to network with people much easier, particularly in the Oracle side of things. We were an Oracle partner, so being able to network directly to Oracle with people that I potentially didn't have my phone number or with that had emails, I could soon realize that actually the power of the networking side of things was huge, not only with my customers, but also with the end partner, and building those relationships with individuals that were also trying to sell into the same account where we had similar offerings but not competitive, i.e. ourselves and Oracle. And I actually started seeing more success, as did we all in data intensity. And I was fortunate enough at the time to work for sales leaders that got it 100%. And I've worked for organizations that don't, and you can really see it when a company doesn't have a partner first or a partner strategy. And so, yeah, I've throughout my career now since sort of 2007, I've always been focused on building a partner channel. And in those early days when I was direct, it was something that was vital to me.
Okay. And what do you see as key to making and building those partnerships? Because I think there's a bit of a skill in that. Not everyone does that so well, but it sounds like you've done a lot of work here and you've been very successful and you've built your career on partnerships. What can you tell me around how to build those partnerships? If there was a younger version of yourself that you're now able to advise, and they're coming into this career, they're coming into a career, and that successful leverage of partnerships is definitely key. What could you give them in terms of advice? How could they, a 3-5 step program or things to do that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think in the early days, I spent so much time fixated on wanting to reach a rep, particularly in Oracle, who are a huge company. And I've pretty much stayed in that environment where I'm always partnering with somebody that's bigger than us. So I'm fortunate enough to wear a few of those battle scars. And I spent so much time in the early days doing account planning and sitting down, share me your accounts and I'll share you mine, and sitting down in meetings with 15, 16 different action points, and none of them ever happening. And I think always wanting to try and sell everything that we do to a partner or a seller in a larger organization. And I think for me, when you're selling into an Oracle, or I've had the pleasure of working with AWS and Databricks and Azure as well, I think for me, it's about how do we represent value and change for a partner to make their lives easier in selling. How can we first and foremost put the customer at the end, at the front of the picture, to say, look, what's the customer trying to achieve? How are they going to get there? And how do we partner to put a solution into the customer that the customer's going to see value in? And I think For me, it's about stepping back sometimes and not wanting land 15 or 20 customers, but build a small success with 1, 2 account managers and then scale that out.
No, it's good advice. I think it's too easy to just get spread too thin. And I think if you can build a really good win for a customer and the partner sales rep, and it's also about being really clear about what the co-sell strategy is. What's the value that you're bringing as the partner to the vendor, and how's that going to help achieve whatever the customer needs? And if you can work together, so it's that symbiosis where you've got 1-on-1 makes 3, is what I used to always say. If you can do that, then you can bring a lot more value to the client. And very often, I think there's a lot of vendors like Oracle and SAP and others, Salesforce as well, I'm sure, they've got very big ecosystems around partnerships. They need partners to do the implementation and all the other value-add services because they're predominantly software-led. So it's vital, I think, and at the end of the day, the client's not really buying a piece of software, they're buying a solution to fix a problem. And if you can bring that part to the table and align very well with the sales rep and then build and demonstrate that value and get a win, then guess what happens? They want to work with you. So that's what happened to me when I worked for Oracle. When I found partners who would give me that value, what did I do? I didn't want to work with anybody else. I'm like, you're my favorite partner. I'm just going to work with you. And it's great because you build that trust. I know if I was to call Danny and go, Danny, this is what I'm trying to do. What can you help me? You're going to deliver and work with me because we built that trust and you've proven yourself. And then then everyone else wants a piece of the pie. All the other sales reps then find out about this partner and want to work with Danny. And I think it's great when you get it right. It can be really good. And so that sort of a land and expand play is super good. But I think what you talked about there, co-sales, key.
And I think it's being laser focused on what your superpower is. AWS are great at asking that, and Azure, what's your superpower? What are you really good at? And I think there's a temptation when you're in the partner world to try and want to do everything. And particularly, it's less so now because I've been in this sort of SaaS ISV world for the last sort of 5 years in data space. But in the sort of more consultancy side of things, there's a temptation to, we'll do that as well. And you know what, we can go out and get a consultant for doing that. So we can try and blag it. And I think what happens is you wear yourself too thin, you fail on a project, and then that's where you start getting reputational damage and you start seeing the drop off. And I also think there's something that grinds me a little bit is there's an expectation in some individuals that I've worked for that partners are just there to deliver pipeline and revenue. And I've been in this role for quite a while now. And the first thing you get was, how much have they delivered in the last 4 or 5 months? And then you question back, what do we offer? And what is our core competency as to why they would deliver us revenue? We don't understand that. Then why would they deliver anything? And more to the point, why are you hiring a partner team in the first place? And I feel that there's a misunderstanding of what the ecosystem is there for sometimes.
Yeah, and I agree. I've seen that as well, where they just think partners are just there to bring them more leads, more deals, as opposed to we should be giving as much as we can to the partners and create that sort of co-sell together. I've seen bad examples and I've seen good examples. I've got a belief now that just with the way selling's changing and just the demands and the way things are moving, that co-sell motion, I think, is becoming more and more important. So what's your take on that? Have you seen a shift in selling and a need to be better at not channel selling or even alliances in a traditional way, but true co-selling, working together? Have you seen a shift in that? Have you got any experiences that you can talk to around that?
Yeah, I think I left Data Intensity and went to a company called Clockwork. They were actually moving Oracle workloads into AWS. They were the first boots on the ground as an Oracle partner. And I remember meeting the founders, and James Ball is still a really close friend of mine now. And Jim actually said to me, look, it was a boast of his that he actually was saying, we've never had one lead through marketing. Everything's come from AWS. And it blew my mind to think, I've never known that. There was me and Oracle partner in a busy Oracle channel, and we were one of many. And there was Clockwork, who had been around for about 3 years, that were getting all of their opportunities come through AWS. And what I started realizing when I was there was also that they were so they were so tapped into all of the different co-sell motions inside of AWS, all the little funding pockets, the ways to engage with reps, the marketplace, which is huge now. So yeah, I think Clockwork started opening my mind up to the potential of the co-sell motion, but also how you need to be laser focused on what your core competency is, and then how do you then wrap that into taking it into the vendor. I think some of the vendors are more advanced. I think if you look at, we partner with Oracle and IBM, and also we've got Azure and AWS and Databricks. I think if you look at some of the legacy players, they are so far behind in terms of creating value for their partners, i.e. if you look at AWS and Azure and Databricks, they're now funding large-scale migrations because they see the long-term benefit of the consumption revenue. So yeah, I think Azure and Databricks will give 10% to the partner over a 3-year period of what the consumption will look like for initial funding of migrations. If you've got talking a $5 million 3-year return of revenue, then they're willing to give up to 500K's worth of funding. AWS has got similar funding. So it's much easier to start leveraging that and take to a customer, look, we've got $1 million migration, but you're only going to pay half of it because AWS are picking up the bill. So I think as a partner, I think some of the mistakes I see in organization is not fully understanding the ecosystem you're trying to sell into, how to take advantage of the programs that are available from a co-sell mechanism, how to engage with reps and highlight all of these things that you don't need to worry about introducing us to the customer because it's not going to cost them anything. So I think the old legacy players like Oracle and IBM are being dragged across because they need to start differentiating, because the AWSs and Databricks of the world have been able to look at the legacy players and say, how do we build better partner ecosystems?
Okay. So you've talked about AWS and Azure and Databricks, so let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So you, in terms of your more recent career, have worked very closely with those large cloud vendors. For other companies out there who maybe have not worked with them, or maybe starting their journey to engage and partner with those type of companies, what is perhaps one misconception that companies might have about working with these massive tech players?
I think it goes back to one of the things we said earlier on around they're there to give us leads. We're not getting leads off of AWS. And then you think the partner ecosystem, I wouldn't even know how many partners they've got. And again, it's like finding a needle in a haystack for the partner rep to the end seller to try and think, actually, I'll go and use these guys. So it's really locking in on your USP and how you can help the organization be laser focused. There's that, I think. And marketplace is an interesting one because I have conversations with startups who say, look, we're not getting any pipeline or we're not getting any consumption through marketplace. And then you think, what are you doing to accelerate that offering out to the market? And they're waiting for marketplace to bring revenue to them. And I think the days have gone where people are just going on to marketplaces now and just putting their credit card in and just hacking away on loads of different products. So I think the biggest misconception is that the cloud vendors are there to provide your company with revenue.
Okay, which is fair enough. So what do you advise then in terms of leveraging those organizations in the right way?
Yeah, I switched about 5 years ago to more of a sort of data space. I went from Clockwork and I actually took the EMEA role at Talend and was leading their channel and partnerships, and then moved on to global alliances for AWS. And I think from an ISV perspective for SaaS product, what I quickly realized is that the minute you try to sell another product with AWS, it's quite difficult. There's a challenge there. When you're a product company trying to sell product to a rep that's trying to sell product, it can be quite challenging and cumbersome. So we've, over the last 4 to 5 years, I've concentrated, and we've just done the same at Serata. We've actually just developed what we call data migration as a service, which is a services wrap around our product to enable sellers. And again, it's about understanding the channel. How do I engage with a Databricks rep? What's my product? What's my offering? How do I make it easier for the sales rep at the other end to sell my stuff? I've got to look at removing as much friction out of the sales cycle for the individual that I want to position me into a company. I know that there's a migration, let's say at Bank of England or whatever, and I want to try and get into that Bank of England. I'm speaking to the Bank of England rep. How do I make it so easy for him to be able to pick me up and just offer me into the customer, and the customer to want to look at that? And I think it's about removing that friction. How do we tap into the core offerings? How do we tap into some of those accelerators that are in the market? Do we want to go direct with the cloud vendors, or do we need to go through somebody like a TD Synapse or a distributor, which they're starting to really change the game in the cloud world? So it's I think for me, it's taking the time, and probably I think the biggest mistake is you develop a cloud strategy and a cloud marketplace or a cloud go-to-market with the cloud vendors in a business, and it happens a lot in startups, without anybody truly understanding how to build that. And then you spend a year or two just spinning plates.
So if I was a startup and I want to get involved in that marketplace, and you were being an advisor or a consultant, what would be the three things I need to go and do to build that alliance partnership? And you've talked about obviously making it easy for the sales rep, but just from a company perspective, are there some things that they should be thinking about beyond just how to make it easy for the sales rep? Is there certain things they need to know or put in place?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something I started doing some mentoring in Barclays by Rise by Barclays, and about a year ago, and there was a company that reached out to me on the back of that, and we did an engagement around, they were just looking for some advice outside of my work around how to build their go-to-market with AWS. They were running on AWS, and subsequently since, I've developed a cloud readiness assessment tool which can help organizations understand their maturity and their readiness to sell into a particular vendor. What I've seen, and I guess how an organization needs to look at it, is one, what kind of are we exclusively going and building on an AWS, or are we going to become GCP or Azure, or all three? So there's a view of what are we building on? Are we building truly in the cloud? How are we building out that platform that we're looking to sell? But from a go-to-market perspective, I don't think people understand the value of marketplace beyond it's not providing us leads. And I think having that understanding of what marketplace can do, for instance, in organizations, and we leverage it here, we're seeing a shift in the market where actually companies are committing to cloud vendors like AWS and Azure, their whole IT spend over the next 3 years. They're doing sort of tens of $1 million worth of cloud commits, whether it be a MAC agreement in Microsoft or an EDP in AWS. These organizations are starting to put all of their spend through it. And I had an interesting chat with a procurement director a couple of years ago in an insurance company, and he said to me, look, if we're going to market now for a particular new product or an offering for services or whatever, if they're not in the AWS marketplace, we're not actually allowed to buy them. We have to go to tender, and we have to go for business representation. If it's in the AWS marketplace, we can just go through a process because we've already got the terms and conditions done. And actually a lot of it means that I now don't even need to, as a supplier, don't even need purchase orders. I don't even need end user agreements. I don't need to go through procurement cycles because organizations have got their agreements with AWS, and we have our agreement with AWS, and you can ride those terms. So I think for a lot of startups that want to leverage the vendors, it's about probably getting somebody in, and there's loads of fractional type alliances, leaders, partner managers now. But I think it's actually spending time to really understand the vendor marketplace and not spreading yourself too thin. Do we want to go in with AWS? Do we want to go with GCP? And then taking time to understand what kind of certifications you need. At Clockwork, it was brilliant when I was there because they made every salesperson, before you passed probation, pass your AWS Cloud Practitioner exam, which then created a culture of when I was talking to AWS, I spoke their language. Yeah. And I think that's phenomenal. If you want to sell to AWS, speak the language. Otherwise, know what's current to the reps, know what they're trying to sell, I know it's everything's AI and data at the moment, and machine learning and all those sorts of things, but actually understand what your partners are trying to achieve in their own customer base, and then work backwards from there.
Some super good advice there. And just for anybody who wants to get it to sell their software, it just sounds, if you get on the marketplace and get certified and get your people certified and do everything you can to differentiate yourself, so almost to a degree specialize and become known for something, then you've got a good chance then if you're then engaging with potential customers who you know are on a particular platform like AWS, then that procurement process sounds like it could be a lot easier, because particularly if you're a small vendor, trying to sell to a big bank, for example, can be very challenging. But if increasingly organizations want to standardize on a particular cloud platform or whatever, they've got a standardized view of that, but also they know what the security credentials are and so on. And then they've got, like you said, terms and conditions assigned. That's got to be a lot easier to sell through the marketplace to get into these big organizations if you're a small specialized vendor. So I think that's super good advice. I didn't know how it worked.
And you could actually, something that was alien to me when we were at Oracle, we could never really, unless you were selling licenses, you could never draw down off of their ELA at Oracle. Whereas in modern cloud world, in Azure and in AWS language, we can actually we can sell services drawing down off their cloud commit, which is huge, because now organizations don't need to find net new budget. So if we're trying to sell $500,000 worth of services and some license to an organization, then you can actually draw down off of those agreements. The rep still gets paid because his commit number's going down, so he's loving life. So there's that as well. Not only is it contractually, but financially it's a lot easier for an organization because they don't need to find net new budget. They can just draw down off of their commits.
Very interesting. Yeah, that sounds like a whole new world, which, worth exploring. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the future of sales and alliances and partnerships. Things are always changing. You've seen a lot of change in the last 10 years. What do you think is the biggest shifts that are happening in B2B sales in the next few years?
It's funny, I went to a Gong breakfast yesterday and the whole talk was about AI tools, as in everything is. And actually, it was quite funny. They put some stats up on the board in terms of, I think, 77% of salespeople are not spending their times doing their week's activity actually selling. Has that changed in the last 10 years? I don't know. I've worked for over-obsessive organizations that want you to fill out spreadsheets still when you've got Salesforce and you've got all of these great tools. Hopefully AI changes that. I saw another stat that Gong were presenting, probably for the use of Gong tools, but one stat was the idea of that 60% of sales process will be automated in the next 3 to 4 years. I can believe that. I think the scary thing is the level of competition is just, I think yesterday Gong was saying just in the sales tool space, that's tripled in the last year, as in the number of startups. And I see it in my inbox. I've got business development leader in my title. I see it, the amount of organizations that are selling me the golden nugget to sales. It's tough. So I think for me, there's a huge confusion about how to build an effective go-to-market. I think there's confusion of, do we cold call, cold email? Do we use digital marketing? Do we still go to events? Yeah. And I think that's the scary part is, how does a modern business do modern business development effectively? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in that area. And for me, that's where partners come in. It's where you build the ecosystems of not only the big shiny cloud vendors, but also the other organizations that can help and complement your tool in co-selling or co-serving your services. But for me, the fundamentals are still the same and nothing's changed.
I think you're absolutely right. I think AI, my belief is AI needs to be seen as augmentation of a human process. We've leaned too heavily on technology to do the work, and I'm talking sales acceleration platforms particularly, and they're not working particularly well now at all. But what does still work is human-to-human conversation. Now, trying to get those conversations is hard. And if you're doing cold email and LinkedIn and all the rest of it, and even cold calling, it's still a hard grind. I'd still put the phone ahead of anything else, because once you get through to somebody, it's a two-way conversation rather than one-way conversation with email. I think anything we can do, and it almost feels like it's going back to the 90s in a way, of finding ways to get in front of people, to stand out, to then have that conversation, assuming you've got something good to say, is definitely a way forward. I'm a big believer in co-selling and what I call ecosystem selling, building a referral network, building a community, which you've been doing just with the Submariners, and you mentioned the other ones with the Royal Marines. These are great. And I think these are key. I'm part of a network called Pavilion. It's been super helpful for me in Dubai, meeting new people and networking, and I've even got some business through that. So networking and working with an ecosystem, whether that's a big partner like Salesforce, HubSpot, AWS, etc., I think it's never been more important to be really clear what you do as an organization, what value that you bring to the client, the customer, but what value you bring to a potential partner. And then there's going to be a bunch of, I don't know AWS at all, but I can imagine that there's probably another company that you could find who you could work with together that is not, that where you're not competing, but perhaps you're selling to the same persona. So if you're selling to the same persona, then why not put a joint proposition together? Because that's going to simplify the buying process probably for the buyer and potentially get more value from that. But I think the problem is people are just inherently lazy and don't want to do the work and don't want to invest the time. But it's one of those things where if you build a community or build an ecosystem, it doesn't go away. It's always getting better and compounding, and it gets easier the more you can put into it. So I think anything around that to build those communities and ecosystems and engage in a very open, non-selfish way will lead to good results. And I'm starting to see people doing that. There's some interesting platforms like Compsor. I don't know if you come across that. Really great platform. Highly recommend it. It looks at primarily your LinkedIn network, but also it looks at other networks as well. But it will look at the route, it'll identify for you the route through to various people, which sure LinkedIn does, but does it very badly. But it will analyze the relationship strength. It's very smart. So if you load your network in there and you've got some friendly allies and you bring them in, you can start to see routes through to people. And it handles all the referral introduction piece as well within the technology. It's very good. And I'm starting to see some interesting plays like that and technology like that where they're looking at moving and transforming the traditional SDR function to more of a go-to-network function as opposed to sell an SDR.
It's really interesting because I think, look, when I started, it was a numbers game. You do Power Hour for 2.5 hours, you'll get somebody to talk to you. You have 10 rejections a day, you'll get one that isn't. And I think some of these industry stats need actually ripping up and just forgetting, because I think we can become laser focused on these. If you get 4 or 5 discussions going, one's going to become, for me, I'm much more a fan of actually building a source of knowledge in terms of who's the ideal accounts that we're going after, keep that number very limited in an ABM perspective, understanding exactly what those organizations are doing, and then building up a picture. What I mean by that is not creepily emailing people and saying, I saw that you went to Birmingham University. I used to be in Birmingham once a year or something like that. I get so many of those emails and it just cringes me. But what I do value is when somebody's actually taken a real time to understand the network. And I think that when that comes back to spending time with partners in sales, understanding what they're trying to achieve in an account, leveraging chat or AI platforms to really dig deep into organizations. Are they hiring for what we're trying to sell them at the moment? What are their core initiatives in a business perspective? And I still, again, that's old school. Go and look at their company reports and things like that. But I think really understanding an organization you're trying to sell to first means that we're not fixated on making 200 calls in a week, but it's about being intelligent with is we're trying to achieve, and not looking at SDRs just as phone people that are making 200 calls or 400 calls a week and asking them why aren't they getting the results. And I think that's where companies fall down. And why aren't we getting leads? Because obviously our go-to-market proposition isn't good enough. It's not the individuals. We can keep swapping out the individuals every 6 months if we really want to. But there's a core factor is if you're not bringing leads in or you're not creating value to get introductions made, then I think there's more of a problem with your ICP and what it is we're trying to sell them.
Yeah. There's a lot of companies have got very poor positioning. They can't articulate the 3 whys. They can't articulate the 3 to 5 things that they solve and the proof points. Instead, they preach at you in terms of this is what we do, rather than here's the problems that we solve. And you see it all the time.
Yeah.
It's very poor. Brilliant. Okay, so I just want to finish off on a couple of things. I know you're a big advocate of mindfulness and meditation. Tell me a little bit about how you came down that path. And I'd love to know, for the listeners out there, everybody's interested in being optimizing and being better at what they do. A lot of leaders are very driven. I'd love to know a little bit about the path you've taken, but then how's that made you a better leader? And how do you think that helps in terms of being a leader and also selling, if you like, for want of a better thing?
Yeah, I think about 3 years ago, I actually started. I had some family trauma in my personal life where I lost a couple of close family members. And at the same time, I built this career, but was becoming further detached from, I guess, my emotions in a way. I was this hardened sales individual that was driving for a successful career. And I think I went to therapy and she started getting me to do these 3-minute check-ins. And ultimately that led me into meditation, and meditation is now a fundamental part of my life. And I've just actually come back from Nepal, where I'm looking to learn to teach meditation and mindfulness. For me, I think some of the things that we do in sales, we're not in the present enough. And I think some of the biggest issues you've got in sales is, and I've done this, I've sat in meetings wanting to say something and not listening to the individual that's talking who's got the problem. I can fix that problem before he's even told me what it is.
Yeah.
Because my product's great and it's shiny and so I think it's helped me qualify out quickly. It's helped me definitely slow, pause and consider actions and think about things in more of in a mindful way. But yeah, just be present. And I think in leadership and in sales, we're often fixated on the future and the past, and not enough attention is being paid. We're always forecasting outwards 3 or 4 quarters and looking back on but I don't think enough attention is often paid into what it is we're doing right now. How can we change the dynamic to be more successful? So I think for me, that mindfulness and that pause enables me to be more considered throughout the day.
Okay, so just trying to understand this a little bit more. So I think by slowing down and being in the present, you're finding different ways to problem solve or sell more effectively. What's it really helping you do?
I think it's giving me clarity. It's helping me see the bigger picture at times and enable me to take a step back, I think, is the key.
Do you think it lets you see the customer perspective far more clear? Because I know we've all been guilty, and I know I have, of not being buyer-centric. We hear that word, but reality is sometimes we're trying to sell what we want to sell rather than truly listening and actively listening to what they need. Do you think it helps with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It helps me sit and listen, definitely. And that, not only in the work life, in my personal life, I've got more time for. And I think it comes back to that present moment, being in the moment, actually wanting to listen to an individual and not have that intention to. And I think when we've got a product to sell and we've got a target to hit, depending on how those numbers are, I think we want to oversell sometimes, to your point, and not listen. So I think you're absolutely right. It enables me to take a step back. But for me, it's not just the sales world. It's that intention that meditation gives me on a daily basis. It enables me to carry that throughout the day in whatever I'm doing, which is a good practice for sales. So I think the benefit for sales, and I definitely don't practice mindfulness to be a better salesperson. I practice meditation and mindfulness to just be a better version of me, which hopefully then creates a concertina into my sales life.
Of course, makes complete sense. Okay, to finish off, can you recommend one book or a habit or a mindset shift that's made a difference to you?
The book that has made the most difference to me in the last 3 years is not a sales book, but it's absolutely fundamentally changed the way I view all relationships, whether it be partners, customers, personal, is The Art of Showing Up by Don Miguel Ruiz. Phenomenal book. I think every couple in the world should read it before they commit. But it talks about part in the book that talks about how many different personalities we bring into when two people meet, there's about 8 different personalities that are kicking off at the same time. There's your perspective of me, there's the perspective that I want to give you, there's the perspective that I see of myself. All of these different perspectives and views of 2 individuals are kicking off at the same time. And I think to try and become just that one version of yourself is the goal for me. Yeah, that book has changed the way I view all relationships and the way I enter in without condition and those sorts of things. So it's, phenomenal book.
Okay, so just tell me what that is again.
The Art of Showing Up.
So the art of showing up. So look, selling is about relationships, so I think it's probably equally valid to selling. I haven't read it. I will go and seek it out. I definitely would probably benefit from it. So Danny, let's leave it on that. That's a great recommendation. Absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for your insights around co-selling, alliances, and hopefully we've inspired a few people to look at some of the big cloud vendors and get involved in the marketplace. And perhaps we've inspired some potential service leavers to go and look at selling in the IT industry as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. And if anybody wants to reach out, then please contact me on LinkedIn and ask away.
Brilliant. I'll make sure your details are provided in the show notes. Thank you.
Cheers, Rik. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Subscribe now to the Behind the Pipeline podcast.